My son-in-law shoved me hard enough that my shoulder hit the door frame, and the framed photo of my granddaughter fell off the wall and shattered on the tile floor. My own daughter stood 3 feet away and watched it happen. I was 67 years old. I had raised her alone for 6 years after her father and I divorced. I had worked 32 years at the same accounting firm so she could go to a good college, so she could have choices I never had. And now I was sitting on the concrete front steps of her Sarasota house in the August heat, my right wrist throbbing, listening to the sound of my own breathing slow down. What my son-in-law did not know, what neither of them knew, was that I had already done what needed to be done 3 weeks before that moment. The accounts were locked. The trust was sealed. The properties were untouchable. And by the time the sun went down that evening, everything they had spent years building toward would begin to fall apart. My name is Rosetta Holt. I spent 32 years as a certified public accountant for a regional firm here in Sarasota, most of them as a senior partner. Numbers were my announce itself. Fraud does not announce itself. It sends a representative first, something reasonable, something that just needs your signature. I had spent 3 decades learning to recognize that representative, and I had gotten very good at spotting it before it sat down. I retired at 64, 2 years before my husband passed. After he died, I moved back into the 2-bedroom condo we had owned outright, took on a part-time bookkeeping role for a nonprofit art center downtown, and learned to live with quiet. My days had shape. My finances were in order. I was not lonely. I was settled. There is a difference. When my daughter called me in February and said she wanted me to come stay with them, that the grandchildren were growing up too fast and she wasn't ready to only see me on holidays, I believed her. She sounded the way she used to sound when she was young, before the years had put distance between us in ways I could now gotta fully account for. He said they had renovated the guest suite. He said I should bring whatever I needed to make it feel like home. He was warm in the specific, performed way of a man who knows the impression he is trying to make. I should tell you that my son-in-law had always been difficult to read. He ran a mortgage brokerage company out of a small office on Fruitville Road called Lighthouse Capital Partners. He talked about money the way some men talk about football. Constantly, enthusiastically, in a language designed to make others feel they hadn't been paying attention. My husband had never trusted him. He used to say the man had a way of making you feel like you'd already agreed to something before you realized you'd opened your mouth. I had dismissed it as old-fashioned protectiveness. My husband was cautious by nature. I thought I was more practical. I packed 2 suitcases and drove 40 minutes down the coast to their house in the Palmer Ranch neighborhood, with its quiet cul-de-sac and its concrete block walls painted the color of sand after rain. The first week was everything my daughter had promised. My granddaughter crawled into bed with me on Saturday morning and asked me to braid her hair, the way I used to braid her mother's. My grandson, 5 years old, brought me every single piece of Lego he owned, piece by piece, presenting them with the seriousness of an archivist. My daughter made shrimp and grits on the first night because it was my favorite. My son-in-law poured wine and asked me about my years at the firm, about cases I remembered, about whether I missed it. He seemed curious. I stood at the window that first Sunday morning, watching the sprinklers sweep across the back lawn, and I thought that maybe I had been wrong about him. That time had softened something in both of us. I was wrong about that. The second week, small things shifted. It started with my condo. I had kept it rented to a young couple since I arrived. Reliable tenants, no trouble. My son-in-law brought it up at dinner one night, while cutting into a piece of grilled fish. He said it might make more financial sense to sell rather than continue renting, given appreciation rates in Sarasota and what rates were doing to buyers. He mentioned it the way people mention things they have already decided, as if they are simply filling in the last part of a sentence you started. I told him I was comfortable with the current arrangement. He nodded and moved on. 3 days later, my daughter sat across from me at the kitchen table with a folder. Her voice was lighter than the words she was using. She said she had been thinking about my long-term planning. She said something about consolidating accounts, about simplifying things at my age. She slid a form across the table, a financial power of attorney, half completed, with her husband's name typed into the signature block. I picked it up. I read every line. I set it back down. "Whose idea was this?" I asked her. She said it was something they had discussed together, that it came from a place of love, that they only wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I said I would think about it. That night, I lay on my back in the renovated guest suite and looked at the ceiling and thought about every balance sheet I had ever reviewed in 32 years of practice. Patterns, the way fraud never leads with itself, the way it layers. First a reasonable suggestion, then a document that just needs to be signed, then another, until the signature is habit and the habit has a cost. I thought about how long they must have been planning this, how the renovated guest suite, the shrimp and grits, the wine and the careful questions, all of it had been the opening line of something else entirely. I did not sleep much. The next morning, while my daughter was driving the grandchildren to school, I sat in my car in the driveway. And called my accountant. A woman I had worked beside for 15 years returned, someone who understood what I meant when I said I needed to move carefully. I told her what was happening. I asked her to place flags on every account tied to my Social Security number and to document the request with a timestamp. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Rosetta, you know how to read a balance sheet. Trust what you're reading." I did. I began watching my son-in-law more carefully that week. He worked from home on Fridays. I started noticing which rooms he went into and when. Twice I came downstairs and found him at the kitchen table with papers spread out that he gathered too quickly when he heard me on the stairs. Once I found my Medicare paperwork, which I kept in a labeled folder in my room. Stacked near the printer, its corner bent in a way it had not been before. I did not confront him. I started documenting instead. Date, time, what I observed. I kept the notes in a small notebook I carried in my cardigan pocket. At the end of the 3rd week, my daughter brought a second set of documents. This time it was a trust modification. Language that would have given my son-in-law co-trustee authority over the marital trust my husband and I had established before he died. Under the proposed terms, my son-in-law would need to approve any distribution I made from my own assets. He would have signing power. I turned each page deliberately. I asked her which attorney had drafted this. She said her husband had a contact who specialized in estate transitions. The letterhead was from a notary company, not a law office. I asked her if she had read the documents herself. The way she looked at the folder, not at me, at the folder, told me the answer. That evening, I drove to a coffee shop 2 miles away and called my attorney from the parking lot. I told her everything: the power of attorney form, the trust modification, the moved paperwork, the conversations. She told me not to sign anything. She told me to come in the following morning. And then she told me something that stopped me cold. My husband's trust, the one he had set up the year before he died, included a commercial property in downtown Sarasota. A small office building, fully leased to a dental practice, deeded solely in my name. A building I had not thought much about because it ran itself, because the income deposited automatically, because I had been too deep in grief in those first months to pay close attention to every detail. A building my son-in-law did not know existed. My husband had been a cautious man. He used to say that you never show anyone the whole picture at once, not because you don't trust them, but because you don't yet know whether they deserve it. He had said this about my son-in-law specifically once, in that quiet way he had, of handing me a piece of information and letting me carry it until I understood what it was for. I understood it now. I drove to my attorney's office the next morning, while my daughter believed I was at my annual physical. I signed documents moving the commercial property, my retirement accounts, and all liquid holdings into an irrevocable trust structure. My attorney filed everything that afternoon and placed my name on a fraud monitoring list with 3 separate financial institutions. I drove back to the house and made lunch. The weeks that followed had a particular texture, the way air feels before a storm when everything is still but nothing is calm. My son-in-law stopped performing warmth. He became efficient, clipped. He walked through rooms where I sat without acknowledging me. He left papers near my space and watched to see whether I moved toward them. He was reading me the way I had once read balance sheets, looking for the entry that didn't add up, and I made sure he found nothing useful. My daughter grew quieter. She started using language I recognized, phrases that were not quite her own, ideas that had the shape of something she had been told, rather than something she had thought. She said things like, "You're making this harder than it needs to be. And we're only trying to protect you," while she stared somewhere past my shoulder. Toward the end of my 4th week there, I came back from a walk to find my room had been searched. Not ransacked, searched. My folders were in the wrong order. The small external drive I kept in my travel case, which contained scanned copies of every legal document connected to my name, was gone. I went downstairs. My son-in-law was at the kitchen counter making coffee. I told him calmly that someone had been through my room. He said the cleaning service had come early. I said we both knew that wasn't what happened. He looked at me over his mug, not angry, measuring. I said nothing else. I went back upstairs, ran the bathroom fan, and called my attorney. She told me to leave as soon as I could do so safely. She had already arranged a place, a colleague of hers in the Bradenton area, a retired social worker named Yvonne, who had a spare room and no connection to anyone in my family. That night I packed one bag, only what mattered: my husband's watch, the letters he had written me when we were 24 and living in separate cities, a photograph of my daughter at her high school graduation, grinning with her whole face before any of this. The next morning, I told them I was going to spend a few days with a friend from my old firm. My son-in-law watched me load the car from the front door. He didn't stop me. I think he believed the drive had already been copied and that I was no longer useful to stay and observe. He was right that I had the drive. He was wrong about what was on it. Yvonne's house was small and full of plants and smelled like coffee and cedar. I sat at her kitchen table that first evening, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was clenched. I had not slept deeply in weeks. That night I slept for 9 hours. I worked methodically over the following days. My accountant confirmed that 2 access attempts had been made on separate accounts, using my date of birth as a security answer, both blocked by the authentication protocols I had set up. My attorney had filed a civil fraud notice and coordinated with the state's financial regulation office. Everything that was mine remained mine. On the 4th day, I went back to the house. I had arranged for a police escort through my attorney's office. 2 officers met me at the end of the street and walked with me to the door. My daughter opened it. She looked at the officers. She looked at me. She stepped back without a word. My son-in-law was home. I moved through the house quickly and deliberately, filling a canvas tote with what I had left behind. I was in the guest room, zipping the bag, when I heard him on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway and considered me the way a person considers a problem they have not yet found the solution to. He said quietly that locking the accounts down had not changed anything, that I would sign the documents eventually because I would not want my daughter to suffer the consequences of my stubbornness. I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed summary my attorney had prepared. A clear accounting of which assets existed, in what legal structure, and what no document he had ever placed in front of me could have touched. He reached for it. I stepped back. He grabbed for my arm, and when I pulled away from him, he shoved me, hard, two-handed, and my shoulder hit the doorframe, and the photograph fell. My daughter appeared behind him. She did not say his name. She did not tell him to stop. She looked at me and said, in a voice I had not heard from her before, flat and worn through, "Just sign it, Mom. Why can't you just help us? Why does everything have to be a fight with you?" I got to my feet. I looked at her, I said, "I saw the documents. His name is on every account those transfers would have created. Not yours, not mine, only his." Something moved across her face. A fracture in something that had been constructed carefully over a long time. She looked at her husband. He looked back at her with the particular expression of a man recalculating. He stepped between us and told me to get out. My daughter, after a silence that lasted much longer than it should have, said the same thing. I walked down the stairs. I walked out the front door. I sat on the concrete steps in the August heat, and then I called the officers waiting at the end of the block. They were at the door in under 5 minutes. I gave my statement in the back of the patrol car with the air conditioning running. An EMT examined my wrist, sprained, not broken. I had photographed the bruising before the officers arrived. I had a second copy of every document my son-in-law had reached for. I had 32 years of practice constructing records that held up. My son-in-law was arrested that evening. What followed unfolded over months, but I will tell you what matters. Investigators from the Florida Office of Financial Regulation had been watching his company, Lighthouse Capital Partners, for 14 months before my case gave them what they needed to move. Client accounts showed funds redirected, authorization signatures that had been forged, fees collected for services never rendered. The notary letterhead on the trust documents he had given me belonged to a former associate who had already surrendered his license in 2 states. 3 other clients came forward within 8 weeks, all of them over 60, all of them widowed or recently retired, all of them told they were receiving help. He was charged with financial exploitation of the elderly, wire fraud, forgery, and felony battery. He did not make bail after the second hearing. My daughter took longer. I want to be honest about this part because it is the part that does not fit cleanly into any story about justice. For years, she had been told that I was difficult, that I had been an absent mother, that I had always prioritized my career over her. These things had been repeated in so many different ways, for so long, that she had stopped examining them. She had confused a narrative she had been given with her own memory. She called me 6 weeks after the front steps. She was at a friend's house, she and the grandchildren. She had filed a protective order of her own. She said, "Mom, I looked at the actual documents. His name was on everything. Not mine, not the kids, just his." I said, "I know." She was quiet. Then she asked how she had not seen it. I told her what I believed to be true, that she had seen pieces of it for a long time. That staying with someone who is slowly rewriting your reality does not mean you are foolish. It means you were trusting, and that someone used your trust against you, and that those are not the same thing. We did not fix everything in that phone call. We are not finished repairing things now, but we are sitting across from each other again, at my kitchen table in the condo I moved back into, with the grandchildren doing their homework on the couch, and the Gulf light coming through the window the way it does in late afternoon. Gold, and unhurried, and indifferent to all the things that happened in its absence. My daughter has started a bookkeeping course at the community college. She said she wants to understand money herself, finally. I told her I would help her. I have been asked to speak at an elder financial safety forum next spring. I have said yes, though I am not someone who enjoys being at the front of a room. I spent my career making sure numbers told the truth. I believe stories should do the same. Here is what I want you to take from this, if something in it felt familiar. The people who want to take from you will not come to your door with anything that looks like a threat. They will come with dinner already made, They will renovate the guest room in your favorite colors. They will pour wine and ask questions about your career as if your past is something they respect, rather than something they are inventorying. And the moment you feel that first small tightening, that quiet instinct that something in the room does not add up, do not dismiss it as paranoia. Do not apologize for it. Do not soften it to spare someone else's feelings. That instinct is not weakness. That instinct is 32 years of watching how numbers behave when someone thinks no one is paying attention. I was always paying attention. If this story reached you, tell me what city you're watching from in the comments. And if someone in your life is in a situation that sounds anything like this, please share it with them. The quietest betrayals are the hardest ones to name, and no one should have to fight them without knowing they are not alone.